some reaction and analysis, we can speak to our international affairs commentator, Douglas Herbert, who joins me on set. Good morning, Doug. Now, Doug, Bolsonaro hasn't spoken yet, a deafening silence. What do you make of it?
Well, look, I mean, we know that he took his cues from Donald Trump's playbook. And you might remember Donald Trump did not concede defeat. And even for several months after the election, it was early January, 2 months after the voting. And even then, he simply acknowledged that Joe Biden was going to be the person taking over and going into the White House. He didn't concede defeat. So, you know, Bolsonaro is basically, if nothing, he's being consistent here. It was only in the final days of the campaign that the outgoing far-right incumbent, as you called him, even was asked the question directly, will you accept the results of this election if you lose? And he did. Yeah, I mean, it seemed sort of begrudging. He said, yes, it's a democracy. I will accept the results. But so far, there's no sign of the concession. You're absolutely right, which is not surprising. This is a man who, along with his allies, his campaign, spent months alleging that Brazil's electronic voting system was rife with fraud, obviously, once again, echoing Donald Trump, his allegations of widespread vote rigging, unsubstantiated false claims, widespread vote rigging and fraud. Jair Bolsonaro and his allies doing everything he could to pull out all the conspiracy theories, nonstop bashing of the judicial system, the courts, journalists, the democratic institutions, anyone who would say a bad word, a negative word, or questioned anything about Jair Bolsonaro. For him and his allies, they were part of a political establishment, elitist conspiracy bent on bringing down their far-right movement. If that sounds familiar, yes, once again, another page from Donald Trump's playbook. Now, that said, are there signs that he might concede? Well, put it this way, it's mixed, right? Some of his supporters, there was one photo that went out overnight of one of his supporters standing on a tank, praying, begging the army of Brazil, do not let this far leftist Lula take over our government. And there really is that among his supporters, this sense of handing over Bolsonaro's great government to a thief, to a man who was imprisoned and all of this. So there are a few. Very few. There's one notable prominent voice, the Speaker of the lower house of Brazil's parliament, a Bolsonaro ally, who basically spoke out and accepted the results, said we must now reach out, extend a hand to our adversaries, debate, and build bridges. We need to hear a lot more of that in the coming hours. But right now, Bolsonaro is taking his cue from Trump, and most of his supporters are foursquare behind him.
Yeah, we had Republicans doing that with Trump, too, and it didn't necessarily make a difference. Doug, if we continue that U.S.-Brazil parallel, Biden has had a pretty difficult job reuniting the country post-Trump. Is Lula's job harder than his, even?
I won't call it mission impossible, but it is mission exceedingly more difficult than his first two terms in office from 2003 to 2010. Back then, he rode the wave of a commodities-driven boom. It was a watershed economy back then. He was able to literally lift tens of millions of Brazilians out of deep impoverishment and poverty. They got mortgages for the first time. Many of them bought cars for the first time. Can he do a repeat? Can we now see Bolsonaro 2.0? Lula 2.0. Will he be able to do that again? Enormous problems. Brazil as a society, first of all, is completely changed. It's much more polarized, much more divided. I just told you about how half of the society is probably unlikely to ever recognize Lula as their president and accept that their champion, Bolsonaro, was defeated in a fair election. But beyond that, you have hunger crisis now imminently facing not 5, 10, 15, 33 million Brazilians are said to be right now facing imminent hunger. You have greater impoverishment. So beyond the economy, you have the lingering effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, which was disastrously, catastrophically handled by Bolsonaro. Almost 700,000 Brazilians died in that. And the Amazon, as if, why am I even saving that for last? The Amazon's fate is the planet's fate. The fate of the Amazon is our future fate as a humanity. The lungs of the planet are hurting badly. Deforestation has gone up 70% over the past few years. I mentioned last week 18 trees a second were being cut down last year under Bolsonaro. And last month alone, an area the size of Greater London of the Amazon forest was razed. This type of deforestation is hurting everyone everywhere because the lungs of the planet, the trees of the planet, are what keep a lot of that carbon dioxide from escaping into the atmosphere. Once it gets out there, it's not going to just remain over Brazil. It's going to go across the planet. It affects irrigation. It affects everything meteorological from Brazil to the U.S. to Europe and beyond. So he has the biggest inbox, perhaps, of any president in Brazil's modern history, if any president in the entire region. for many, many decades.
And then environmental damage is something that takes a very long time to recover from.
Yeah.
Doug Herbert, thank you as always for your analysis. Our international affairs commentator, Douglas Herbert.